Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Storytelling in Discourse Analysis. Interactive assistant storytelling is a fundamental way in which humans make sense of the world, communicate experiences, and convey meaning. In discourse analysis, storytelling is examined to understand how narratives shape social identities, construct realities, and influence power relations. Stories are not just simple reflections of events, they are selective, structured, and embedded with values and ideologies. Discourse analysis of storytelling looks at how language is used to construct narratives in ways that reflect broader cultural, social, and political dynamics. By analyzing the structure, themes, characters, and rhetorical strategies in stories, discourse analysts can uncover the ways in which stories frame social issues, influence public perception, and promote certain ideologies while marginalizing others. Storytelling in political speeches, media, advertising, social movements, and everyday interactions can reveal the underlying power structures and the ways in which narratives are used to shape reality and maintain or challenge the status quo. Key features of storytelling in discourse analysis. 1. Narrative structure. In storytelling, the narrative structure refers to how a story is organized, typically including elements like the introduction, conflict, climax, and resolution. Discourse analysis examines how these structures are used to convey meaning and shape audience interpretation. Example: in political speeches, a common narrative structure might present a problem, e.g., economic crisis, introduce a hero, e.g., the politician or the government, and offer a solution, e.g., a policy proposal. Discourse analysis would explore how this structure creates a sense of hope or control, positioning the speaker as a savior and aligning with certain political ideologies. 2. Construction of social identities. Storytelling is a powerful tool for constructing and reinforcing social identities. Through narratives, people and groups are often categorized as heroes, victims, or villains, shaping how audiences perceive social roles and identities. Example: in news media, immigrants might be portrayed as victims fleeing violence, or illegal invaders threatening national security. Discourse analysis would investigate how these contrasting stories construct different identities for immigrants and influence public attitudes toward immigration policy. 3. Moral and ethical framing. Stories often carry moral or ethical messages, presenting certain behaviors or decisions as good or bad. Discourse analysis looks at how these moral framings influence public understanding of complex social issues, framing them in ways that simplify or polarize debates. Example: in environmental campaigns, stories might frame nature as a fragile ecosystem in need of protection, positioning environmental activists as morally right and those who harm the environment as villains. Discourse analysis would explore how these moral narratives encourage environmental responsibility and activism by framing certain actions as ethical imperatives. 4. Empathy and emotional appeal. Storytelling frequently uses emotional appeal to generate empathy, helping audiences connect with the experiences of characters or groups. Discourse analysis examines how emotions are invoked to mobilize support for causes or shape public attitudes. Example: in charity campaigns, personal stories of individuals suffering from poverty or illness are often told to evoke empathy and encourage donations. Discourse analysis would explore how these emotional stories work to humanize abstract issues, such as poverty or disease, and motivate action. 5. Power dynamics in storytelling. Storytelling is often a way to reflect or challenge power dynamics in society. Discourse analysis looks at whose stories are told, whose voices are privileged, and which perspectives are marginalized or silenced. Example: in historical narratives, stories of colonization may focus on the civilizing mission of European powers, marginalizing the experiences of indigenous peoples. Discourse analysis would examine how this storytelling reinforces colonial power structures, while also exploring counter-narratives that challenge these dominant historical accounts. 6. Framing of collective memory. Stories are central to shaping collective memory, which refers to how groups or nations remember their shared past. Discourse analysis investigates how storytelling is used to construct collective memories that shape national identity, historical consciousness, and political ideologies. Example: in national holidays or commemorations, stories of war heroes or independence struggles are often told to reinforce collective memory and national pride. Discourse analysis would explore how these narratives frame historical events in ways that support national unity and political legitimacy, while potentially omitting or downplaying less heroic aspects of history. 7. Cultural values and ideologies. Storytelling reflects and reinforces cultural values and ideologies by embedding them within narratives. Discourse analysis uncovers how stories convey societal norms and expectations, shaping how people view the world and their place within it. Example: in advertising, a story about a family gathering around the dinner table might emphasize values of togetherness and family unity. Discourse analysis would explore how this narrative reflects broader cultural ideologies about family life and social cohesion, aligning with capitalist goals of consumption through family-focused products. Methods for analyzing storytelling in discourse. 1. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis is a method that focuses on the structure and content of stories, exploring how events, characters, and plots are arranged to convey meaning. This method looks at how narratives construct identities, convey values, and influence public perception. Example: a narrative analysis of political speeches might look at how a leader tells the story of national recovery after a crisis, using themes of resilience and unity to frame their leadership as essential. The analysis would focus on how the structure of the story reinforces political authority and appeals to voters. 2. Frame analysis. Frame analysis examines how stories frame issues by emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying others. This method looks at how framing in storytelling shapes audience interpretation and aligns with particular ideologies or agendas. Example: in climate change discourse, one narrative might frame the issue as an economic opportunity for green innovation, while another frames it as a global crisis threatening human survival. Frame analysis would explore how these stories shape public understanding of climate change and influence policy preferences. 3. Rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis investigates how storytelling uses language to persuade, focusing on appeals to ethos, credibility, pathos, emotion, and logos, logic. This method looks at how stories are crafted to influence audiences and align them with certain political or social goals. Example: in a charity's fundraising campaign, a story about a child overcoming adversity might appeal to pathos by invoking sympathy, while also using logos by presenting statistical evidence about how donations make a difference. Rhetorical analysis would examine how these elements work together to persuade potential donors. 4. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, examines how storytelling reflects and reproduces power relations, ideologies, and social inequalities. CDA focuses on how dominant stories reinforce hegemonic power structures and how alternative stories challenge the status quo. Example: a CDA of media coverage of war might reveal how stories of military intervention are framed as liberation or humanitarian efforts, legitimizing state power while marginalizing stories of civilian suffering or anti-war resistance. The analysis would focus on how these narratives reinforce certain political ideologies and silences dissent. Examples of storytelling in discourse analysis. Example 1. Political campaign narratives. In political campaigns, candidates often tell stories about their personal backgrounds or the challenges faced by the country. A politician might frame their candidacy as a journey from humble beginnings to fighting for the working class. Discourse analysis would examine how this story constructs the politician's identity as relatable and trustworthy, reinforcing their alignment with populist ideologies. Example 2. Media coverage of natural disasters. Media stories about natural disasters often frame the event as a tragedy affecting innocent victims. Phrases like, communities devastated by the hurricane, but coming together to rebuild, create a narrative of resilience. Discourse analysis would explore how these stories evoke empathy and solidarity, while also framing recovery as a collective effort that downplays potential governmental or systemic failures. Example 3. Social movements and activism. In social movements, storytelling is used to mobilize support and create a sense of collective identity. For example, in the Black Lives Matter movement, personal stories of police violence are shared to highlight systemic racism and humanize the struggle for racial justice. Discourse analysis would examine how these stories frame the movement's goals and appeal to moral and emotional reasoning to gain public support. Example 4. Corporate branding and storytelling. Companies often use storytelling in branding to connect emotionally with consumers. A company might tell a story of innovation and perseverance in creating products that change lives. Discourse analysis would explore how this narrative constructs the company's identity as socially responsible and innovative, aligning its brand with consumer values. Example 5. National identity and historical narratives. In national discourses, stories of past wars or independence movements often frame the nation as heroic and resilient. For example, stories of the American Revolution might emphasize freedom fighters standing up to tyranny, reinforcing a narrative of national identity based on liberty and justice. Discourse analysis would explore how these stories construct a collective memory that supports national unity and political legitimacy. Challenges in analyzing storytelling through discourse. 1. Complexity of narratives. Stories can be complex and layered, with multiple meanings and interpretations. Discourse analysts must navigate these complexities, considering how different audiences may interpret the same story in diverse ways. 2. Cultural and contextual differences. Storytelling practices vary across cultures and contexts, making it important for discourse analysts to account for cultural differences in how stories are told, valued, and understood. 3. Power dynamics and representation. Not all stories are equally represented in public discourse, with dominant groups often controlling which stories are told and how. Discourse analysts must critically examine whose stories are being told, who is silenced, and how power dynamics shape storytelling. Conclusion. Storytelling is a powerful tool in shaping social, political, and cultural realities. Through discourse analysis, researchers can explore how narratives construct identities, convey ideologies, and reflect power relations. By analyzing narrative structures, framing, emotional appeals, and representation, discourse analysis uncovers how stories influence public perception and social behavior. Understanding the role of storytelling in discourse is essential for critically engaging with media, politics, and everyday communication, as well as for recognizing the impact of stories in shaping collective memory and social change. Frequently asked questions. What is the role of storytelling in discourse analysis? Storytelling in discourse analysis is studied to understand how narratives shape social identities, construct realities, and influence power relations. It reveals how stories are structured to promote certain ideologies, frame social issues, and maintain or challenge the status quo. How does narrative structure impact the meaning of a story? The structure of a story, introduction, conflict, climax, and resolution, affects how the audience interprets its message. Discourse analysis examines how these elements are used to create meaning, evoke emotions, and guide the audience's understanding in contexts like political speeches or media coverage. How do stories construct social identities? Stories often label people as heroes, victims, or villains, shaping public perceptions of social groups. For instance, immigrants in news stories might be framed as either victims or threats, influencing attitudes toward immigration. Discourse analysis investigates how these narratives build social identities and affect public opinion. What is moral and ethical framing in storytelling? Moral and ethical framing involves presenting behaviors or actions as inherently right or wrong within a story. Discourse analysis looks at how this framing simplifies complex issues, polarizes debates, and shapes public attitudes by assigning moral value to actions, such as environmental responsibility or social justice. How do stories evoke empathy and emotional response? Stories often use personal experiences and emotional language to foster empathy, making audiences more likely to connect with the issue at hand. Discourse analysis explores how these emotional appeals motivate public support and humanize abstract concepts like poverty or conflict. What are power dynamics in storytelling? Power dynamics refer to which stories are told, who tells them, and whose perspectives are silenced or amplified. Discourse analysis examines how storytelling can reinforce or challenge existing power structures, such as colonial narratives that prioritize the colonizer's perspective while minimizing indigenous voices. How does storytelling contribute to collective memory? Stories shape how societies remember their shared pasts, influencing national identity and historical consciousness. Discourse analysis investigates how narratives of events like wars or independence movements reinforce collective memory and support political legitimacy or unity. What is the importance of cultural values and ideologies in storytelling? Stories embed and reflect cultural values, reinforcing societal norms and ideologies. For instance, ads featuring family gatherings promote values of unity and tradition. Discourse analysis reveals how these stories reinforce consumer behavior or social expectations. Which methods are used to analyze storytelling in discourse? Narrative analysis examines the structure and content of stories to see how they shape identities and public perception. Frame analysis studies how stories emphasize certain aspects and reflect specific ideologies. Rhetorical analysis looks at how language in stories persuades through ethos, pathos, and logos. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, explores how storytelling reflects power structures and ideologies. What are the challenges in analyzing storytelling? Challenges include navigating the complexity of layered meanings in stories, understanding cultural differences in storytelling practices, and addressing power imbalances that affect whose stories are heard or silenced.